it seems that meditation has made a lot of progress in terms of its impact on mental health. And some of Richie Davidson's work has been responsible for bringing to us in a scientific and quantifiable way of how meditation changes the structure of the brain. And of course, I think you yourself have been under his MRI, and as well as other famous monks like Matthew Ricard, who are at the juncture of science and spirituality, so to speak. So meditation makes a person happier. A happy person has fewer mental issues. That is getting more and more accepted in today's world. What about meditation and physical health?
Yeah, this is a marvelous question. I agree with you that in terms of mental health, sense of well-being, it definitely can be fostered, improved through meditation. In terms of physical health, there's a lot more research showing actually that physical health is enhanced through positive mental states. So positive mental states have a very positive effect on physical health. For example, many years ago now, there was very good research done, published in the best journals, replicated, done a number of times, on breast cancer, on women with breast cancer. And what they did is they divided the women into two groups. All the women got whatever treatment, whatever was indicated for their type and stage of breast cancer, whether it be surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, or some combination. The difference in the two groups was one received TLC. TLC is love.
Tender loving care.
Tender loving care.
Okay.
And what happened is they sent a psychologist to them regularly and just flooded them with love. Okay. And what they found was that the group of women that received the love on satisfaction measurements, questionnaires, as you would expect, they had a higher level of life satisfaction. What also happened, which wasn't expected, those women that received love lived longer. It's good research. It's been accepted. People don't really understand why, but it's been accepted. And that was some years ago. More current research is looking at the immune system. So they're looking at measures like blood tests, measuring kind of markers for the immune system, such as IL-6 or cortisol or other chemical markers in the blood, that show us the state of the immune system. And they're finding that the immune system is enhanced. IL-6 is improved, cortisol levels go down, which are stress markers, or to do with the immune system. And these are so that the health is improved through the immune system, through meditation and positive mental states. And there's a new area that's just coming, hasn't really been published yet, so it's very new, looking at genetics and how the field of human genetics, so people's genetic systems, are enhanced or improved through meditation. And specifically, they're looking at the area called epigenetics. And epigenetics is that area of genetics which has to do with regulation. And regulation means when the genes are turned on or turned off. And turn on and turn off means the job of the gene is to make protein.
Yes.
Okay? And so when genes are turned on or turned off, they're either making or not making protein. So it turns out that the preliminary evidence, it's not fully confirmed yet, but the preliminary evidence shows that through meditation, the epigenetic regulation of protein manufacture is enhanced such that the immune system is stronger during states of meditation. So this is very exciting new research showing a link between meditation and physical health through the genetic or epigenetic system.
Okay. So meditation reduces stress levels, probably reduces the number of heart attacks that people have for sure. And as you said, it also affects you at a deeper level in terms of making choices of which genes you're going to manifest into your body. So I think I read something by Dr. Bruce Lipton once And he said that we are not the victims of our heredity as we have always thought we were. We are not the slaves of our heredity. And in fact, we have a choice of which genes we would like to manifest. And I wanted to ask you, is there anything in the Buddhist teachings that correlates with this kind of gene manifestation by choice? Or?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is plasticity, which the neuroscientists have picked up early. They say the brain is now plastic, or there's plasticity. It just means change. Things can adapt. Okay? And now you're talking about the genetic system having maybe some similar properties of adaptation of change. And, the central pillar in Buddhist philosophy is impermanence. I mean, of course, emptiness is the central pillar, but one of the most important pillars propping up this notion of understanding reality as emptiness or shunyata is impermanence or change. So they're very closely, connected.
Yes.
This notion that things are not fixed, things can change, both in modern science, medical science, and also in Buddhism.
Right. I also wanted to go back to what you briefly referred to, that you've been talking about this in your medical school and your lectures at Hong Kong University, is the interface, you said, of quantum physics and Buddhist philosophy. And now from what I understand, I'm not a physicist by any stretch of the imagination, but from what I understand, that at a very deep level, when you break down matter to its most, deeper, you keep going, you come to a point where it completely is in resonance with what the Buddha had to say about matter, about the fact that there is no intrinsic reality to anything, that there is nothing, there's no matter that has any substance to it. So how would you explain that?
Yeah, I think there is a tremendous overlap between the way physicists, particularly quantum physicists, approach, understanding the world, and how the Buddha and subsequently Buddhists do the same. As I understand it, when physicists, particularly quantum physicists, start looking at the micro world, the subatomic world, they start seeing that things are less solid, things are less predictable than we thought. So now probabilistic approaches start entering the picture because they can't pin things down.
Right.
Why? Because what we think of as things probably don't exist. I mean, that's one way to approach it, and many quantum physicists approach it that way, maybe not all. That things as we think about them and have thought about them don't exist. So when we went to school, we learned about the atom. It was a ball and a stick model, right? Well, this is far from truth or reality. And now we look at, the spin of electrons. We look at all the different particles that make up the electron, right? And we look at their properties. And these things are theoretical. We do measure them sometimes, okay? But we don't measure the particle. We measure that they've kind of been there, right? We measure images, these bubble chambers or whatever, these atom smashers like the Haldron atom smasher.
Right.
In CERN, or near in CERN, we're not actually measuring so-called particle. And what a lot of physicists are coming around to is that maybe there aren't so-called particles. There's more properties, maybe something energy. When we say energy, we don't know what that means. But it's not a solid kind of phenomenon. There are things like, there's a wonderful experiment. It's the slit experiment, where you have two slits and you send a photon. They often do it with photons. I think they can do it with other very small so-called subatomic particles. And they send them through these slits. And then you measure, there's a screen behind, and they can measure where these so-called, photon particles, are landing on the screen. And sometimes you have these two distinct areas where the so-called particles land on the screen after going through the slit. If you do it as one slit, if you do it as two slits, you see this array that looks like a wave, okay, not a particle. So it's very confusing, to many of us why this is. That sometimes a so-called particle acts like a wave, more like an energy phenomenon, and other times it acts more like a very tiny, photon particle.
Yeah.
So again, this is beginning to shake up our understanding that the world, even at the subatomic level, is kind of solid.
Yeah.
It may well be probabilistic.
Yes.
It may well be, we can, for example, we can measure velocity of a small subatomic particle, but at the same time we cannot measure where it is. If we measure where it is, we can't measure its velocity.
Okay.
So I begin to see a much more relativistic or relative world. And Buddhism at its deeper levels talks about dependent designation. Okay? Dependent designation is a type of dependent arising, and dependent arising is the flip side of emptiness. Same coin, two sides. Okay? And when we talk about dependent arising, and particularly the subtle form we call dependent designation, the Buddha said that's reality, nothing more. It means that things arise out of a designation, a mind that somehow indicates there's something there. And now, as I understand it, I'm no physicist, but as I understand it, a lot of the quantum physics theory and scientists are beginning to come to some of those kind of conclusions. That what we see, even on the subatomic particle level, is not something that's actually there. It's partially, at least, created by the mind.
Yes. Yes, and the very expectation of seeing something there makes it happen, kind of.
Exactly.
Yes, so the intention.
Exactly, which is a mental phenomenon.
Yes.
Exactly. Now, some people come to the conclusion, even in Buddhist philosophy, that there's nothing other than mind. Everything is mind. Okay? There's some, controversy over that, and many people feel that there's an even more subtler understanding, which is there is something, quote unquote, out there, okay, but it's not out there by itself. It needs a mind to be there, that interaction. So again, we have some, dependent designation, we have something that's very relative.
Coming to other topics, including quantum physics, that are frequently brought out at the Mind and Life conferences, which I know that you're very much involved in, and you're a regular speaker at these conferences that were initiated by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in order to bring about a dialogue between the scientific community and the spiritual community. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this conference, and from what I understand, there are a few areas of discussions that almost always come up in these conferences, and one of them is the quantum physics and how it relates to the spiritual teachings. The other one is the neuroscience and the contemplative tradition, and how neuroscience is proving the validity of contemplative practices. And the third one is the nature of consciousness itself. And that is pretty much what you were just saying about what the Buddhists believe about the mind. So the nature of consciousness, how does it, the understanding of what consciousness is, how does that affect the medical community in particular? Because if you don't believe that there is, the brain is nothing more than chemical processes, there's nothing beyond the brain that's affecting the body, then how are you going to integrate that into medicine? I'm sure that's one of the challenges that you face, and what do you think about that?
Yes, I think you're right. I think that does make it more difficult for medical doctors to work particularly on the emotions and the feelings, that level, which is a very important part of medicine. Because as we talked about earlier, that kind of stuff directly also affects healing. And a doctor's job is to help people feel well. So we can't neglect that. It's very, very important. I think maybe psychiatrists come closest. Yeah, not so much the psychiatrists that are just pushing the drugs or doing research, using the fMRI and the EEG, but the psychiatrists that are out there taking care of folks and that are doing it with some kind of cognitive therapy, so they're talking, they're listening, And for them, I think they recognize that the kind of phenomenon that's happening is emotions, is thoughts, is feelings. And it's not the brain or the nervous system. You know? So they may come closer to the notion of consciousness that has kind of, if you will, a little bit of its own life. Not its own in terms of being independent and, you know, not contradicting the Buddhist wisdom, but its own just in a general sense that it's more than the nervous system. And I think people that kind of start to go in this direction, their own lives open up. They find more joy, more peace, more happiness. And just that in itself, one becomes a better human being. So when you're dealing with an unruly teenager, you know, it's very helpful to have that attitude. When you're dealing with a patient, a client who's very upset, very frightened, you know, to have that kind of, calming effect is tremendously helpful. So we're a better human being, we're a better parent, and I think we're also a better physician. The more we validate, that mind, that consciousness, and work with it to try to make it more positive.
So there's a lot of research and work that has been done within science that needs to be kind of also, taken into account and respected. Where do you think is the biggest barrier to get to the next level where we can incorporate all the teachings in a more holistic way, in a more holistic medicine style? I mean, is it the big pharma? Is it the institutions that we have ourselves, established over the last 50 to 100 years? I mean, what is it that's going to prevent people becoming a little bit more holistic in their attitude?
I think, one way that this can help, that this can slowly happen, is the people that do this stuff in the institutions. So if it's in a university, it's a professor, it's a student. I mean, basically, and then there's their staff that support all that work. So the more those people are open in their personal lives, to this, I think then slowly that has an impact. And we're seeing that. For example, when we were talking earlier, coming over here in the car, we were talking about, the Summer Research Institute, SRI, that's part of one of the activities of Mind and Life Institute. And that happens every year. It has for 9 or 10 years in Middle State, New York at the Garrison Institute in the month of June. It's a week-long conference, brings together 150 to 200 mostly young scientists. Some of them are not so young, and they're very senior people. Richard Davidson often comes to those, and other senior scientists. And then there are some contemplatives. I've gone to most of those. Other contemplatives, there are a number of others that also go to that. And what happens there is for a week, scientific papers, usually on meditation and positive mental states, compassion, etc., are presented. Okay. What also happens is Wednesday, the midday of the week, we're in total silence and we meditate all day. At the beginning and the end of each day, we're in silence and we meditate for 45 minutes or so. Yes. So this is kind of amazing. And a lot of these scientists, I think the number is close to half. Now, of course, they're selected because they're interested in this field and everything about meditation and compassion, but have their own meditation practice. And many of them are either Buddhists or, kind of take a lot from traditions like Buddhism that work with the mind and work with, transforming the mind and becoming a more happy, joyous, compassionate person. So I think from bottom up, for example, at the university here, Hong Kong University, I've become extremely busy, so I rarely have a sit-down meal, okay? So there's a Subway sandwich place that's right en route for me, okay? So almost every day, or maybe every other day, I stop there and I get the foot-long veg patty Subway sandwich. Okay. I was there a few days ago, and there are 3 women that I see always working there, and they kind of smiled at me. I'm always in my robes. They said, "Are you Buddhist?" And I said, "Yes, I'm a Buddhist monk." They all smiled, and they said, "We're Buddhists." And I said, "I'm really happy." And we greeted each other like this. And they made me the thickest sandwich.
So you were done for dinner as well?
It was, yes, exactly. It was 2 meals. So it's happening, I think, in the faculty community, in the students, the staff, people living and working at the university. It's happening from the grassroots up. And I think that's a wonderful way to kind of, change the flavor and have more of an openness to, it doesn't have to be Buddhism, because, a lot of higher institutions, lower institutions, educational institutions separate.
But talking about that Subway sandwich reminds me of this question I wanted to ask you about the vegetarianism. I mean, you are a doctor. Do you believe that it would be possible one day? I don't know if you've seen some of those horrific videos about how our food is sourced at these factory farms where the animals are not treated so well. And that's one of the reasons that more and more people who are not Buddhists and not vegetarians by religion have opted for a vegetarian lifestyle, including animal ethics and including carbon footprint of what it takes to bring that piece of meat to your table. What do you think is the future of vegetarianism in general?
Yeah, it's a lovely question, Sangeeta, and it's very important. I think we see a growing interest in vegetarianism. A lot of, particularly younger people, and probably people of all ages, are turning to, not eat flesh because of what happens to the animals, how they're raised, how they're slaughtered, the tremendous suffering they go through.
Yes.
We see that every day in India, particularly in rural India. I live in rural India, and we see, sometimes the animals being butchered right there in the little tiny, shack on the street where they then sell it. We see the carcasses hanging. We see how the chickens are kept in coops there's just no room for them literally to move, and they're dirty and they're diseased, and it's just a terrible life for them. We also see pictures. They're common now where I live to show pictures of, how the brutality to the animals to bring them to our, so-called dinner table. And I think lots of people are being moved by that.
Coming to your organization that you have started, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Altruism in Medicine is the name, and I think there's some information available on the website. It's altruismmedicine.org, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
I'd love to hear what is the main mission, what are the activities, what do you hope to really accomplish with this wonderful organization?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sangeeta. Yes, it's a new nonprofit organization. It's registered in America, USA, but it's international in its scope. And one of its main purposes is to bring more compassion into the field of medicine.
Okay.
And so I do a lot of work. When I travel around the world, I'm often invited to universities and sometimes to medical schools. So I try to teach more compassion to the doctors to be, the medical students, and other healthcare professionals, nurses, dentists, and other people in traditional medicines like Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine, etc., who are either in training or are doctors, to bring more compassion. And the compassion obviously is beneficial for who they're taking care of, but it's also beneficial for them because the health field has lots of burnout. People get stressed, people get depressed. We unfortunately see a lot of suicide among health professionals.
Doctors as well.
Mm-hmm. So compassion can help the caregivers as well as the people receiving the care. And so that's the main purpose of our Altruism in Medicine Institute. The second purpose, which is mental health care globally. And there's an incredible lack of mental health care facilities. And even when we have facilities like in America, people can't go. Or their insurance pays for one visit or maybe a few visits, and they have to pay a portion of it, and they can't afford it, and then it stops. So they can't go. So, access for having facilities, which means men and women who are trained professionals in taking care of people with mental health issues, and facilities so that people can find a place to actually physically go. And then if it's, if they need to pay for it, to have some kind of, help with that. And in most countries around the world, there aren't the facilities. They just don't exist. And so to build awareness to people of this lack, and then to collaborate with larger institutions around the world that are trying to take care of this issue. people like the WHO and other large organizations to try to collaborate with them to build awareness.
It's wonderful. I wish you all the best for this endeavor. One last question, which could be like a practical exercise. How do you teach compassion? How could you lead us through, or to tell us a little bit about a compassion meditation that you teach to the doctors and the medical healthcare professionals?
Good, thank you. There are many, but let me focus on one which we call kindness. And what it is actually recognizing kindness in others. So that's the exercise, to recognize kindness in others. And we artificially divide others, people, animals, everyone, into three groups. And so one group are those we love. The second group are those we don't know, so-called strangers. And the third group are those that we are uncomfortable with, we might label enemies.
The most challenging ones.
Most challenging ones. And we try to see how those, folks are showing us kindness. It's a mental exercise. They may not actually be showing us kindness. For example, the strangers, we look at everything that we need in our daily lives to stay alive and to thrive. So food, the coffee we drink, the tea we drink, all the food we use, to try to remember the whole chain, if you will, of, starting from things that are grown, the soil that has to be prepared, etc., etc., the processing, the packaging, the transportation. And each of those stages require the input of lots of animals, lots of people, their families. So all those strangers are involved with that process, even though they're not intentionally being kind to us. Without their help, we wouldn't have our food, our clothing, our Buddhist door facilities and all the technology, and all the people without their help, okay? So that's how we can see the kindness from the so-called stranger. And then from the so-called enemy, okay, all of us get angry. We have to be in the front line with that teenager. We have to be in the front line with that colleague or that person at work who's really pushing our buttons, okay? And then we have an opportunity to take that, what could have been anger or upset or frustration, we have an opportunity to shift that into patience. Even, it's not easy, but eventually even into love and compassion. And the way we do it is we recognize that person's out of balance. Not hard to recognize that with a teacher, with a teenager. Sometimes it's hard to recognize it with a colleague or a friend, a so-called friend, who's now pushing our buttons. Yeah. But the fact that they're pushing our buttons means that they're out of control. They're out of balance. They're not happy. So then we can think, well, why are they not happy? We might know, if it's somebody very close, we may know what their issues are, but often we don't know their issues, okay? So we can think of the big issues that make people unhappy. Relationship stuff. Yeah, we all have problems in relationships. We had. So we know how that can be painful, creates hurt. Economic problems. Maybe they have a lot of job insecurity, which people have a lot these days, and they're worrying about it, they're upset about it. Maybe they've lost their job, okay? Thirdly, health issues. As we get older, we have more and more health issues, and we know what that feels like. It creates a lot of anxiety and fear. Am I going to be the rest of my life like this? Am I getting closer to my death? All these things come up when we have health issues. So we think that person is out of balance, not happy, because of maybe relationship, economic, health issues. And by just thinking that way, it's harder to get angry. Now we have to do this early in the process. If we're already full-blown, we're yelling and screaming, it's not going to help. Too late. We have to recognize through mindfulness practices when that anger is starting to come, and that we can train and we can look in when we get a little jittery or we're in a situation with a certain person or a certain kind of situation, we know, oh yeah, last time I got angry, okay? So then be careful and start to do this process. So this I teach to a lot of people. And you can actually take it in and do it as a meditation.
That's really wonderful. And how many weeks or months of practice do you think it takes for someone to actually change their personality to now become a more compassionate human being?
A lifetime.
Okay.
Several lifetimes.
We are all works in progress.
But I don't want to give sort of totally bad news, and so people turn off to this and say, okay, I can't do that. There are lots of research studies going on. I'm involved with one at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, in Leipzig, which is training compassion, and they're using a 2-week intervention. And actually, Richie Davidson, who you mentioned, they also have short-term 1 or 2 week interventions training compassion. So, and these work. Now, they may not change our personality.
But it's a start.
But it's a start. And so people's behavior really does change. There are some things that we can measure that really do change to make us more compassionate. So I don't want to tell people that, it's too difficult or lifelong and they get turned off. Even short interventions, training people in compassion, can help us begin that journey of becoming a more compassionate person.
So we are all on this journey. Thank you so much for coming and for gracing us with your presence and for answering all our questions. We hope to see you on your next visit to Hong Kong, and hopefully we'll have some more questions for you then.
Thank you very much, Sangeeta.